The Draugr Plague, Burn the Longhouse. Season 1, Episode 7. Before dawn, the village moved as if it had already been buried and was trying to climb out before the ground froze shut. No calm morning came to soften Ulfric's order. The war, horns that had sounded across the fjord, still lived in every face, even when the wind swallowed their last echoes. The wounded salt line lay between the houses and the ice like an old scar split open again. Its white crust had turned grey where feet had trampled it, where brine had spilled too thin, where fear had made hands careless. Beyond it, the ice held darkness in long plates. Shapes moved there when the moon slid behind cloud. Men told themselves those shapes were broken ridges. Women told children not to look. The returned coin lay on the shore where Freya had set watchers around it. No one touched it. No one needed to. It caught what little moon remained and answered with a small, cold glint, clean of seawater, clean of obedience. It had gone into the fjord with the rest of the gold, and had come back as if the sea had spat out a bone. Ulfric stood above it until his eyes hurt from refusing its brightness. Behind him, people tied bundles with poor rope and strips torn from bedcloth. One boat had a cracked rib patched with a door plank. Another still smelled of pitch that had been scraped from a storage jar and mixed with ash because there was not enough left to use clean. Sledges groaned under children, old women, iron pots, wrapped blades, spare wool, and sacks whose contents no one trusted. Food was counted in handfuls. Salt was counted by pinches. Fuel was counted by what could be burned without killing memory. Freya moved among them with a spear in one hand and a child's mitten in the other. She fastened the mitten to a small wrist, then turned and struck a man's shoulder with the shaft of her spear when he tried to carry a chest too heavy for travel. "Leave it," she said. "My father made it." "Then your father would curse you for dying under it." The man stared at her. The chest stayed in the snow. Ulfric heard the exchange and felt no relief. Every order that saved a life cut away another plank from what they had been. He had commanded evacuation by dawn. Dawn was coming too quickly, and not quickly enough. Near the storehouse, a woman tried to divide salt into 3 cloth corners and stopped when she saw there was not enough for even a proper pinch in each. She looked to Ulfric for permission to pretend otherwise. He shook his head. The lie would be lighter than truth for a moment, and heavier than a stone by noon. She poured the salt into one pouch and tied it hard, weeping as if she had killed something useful. Around her, others made the same kind of murder. A good rope was cut into shorter lengths. A warm cloak was torn so 2 children could have strips for their hands. A shield with a cracked boss became a sled bottom. Every saving choice made another thing poorer, and every poorer thing still had to serve. The Longhouse still stood at the heart of the village. In the dark before morning, it looked less like a building than a beast keeping its breath in. Smoke no longer rose from its roof hole. Its doors were shut against the wind, though everyone knew the wind had already entered through gaps, cracks, and grief. Inside were benches rubbed smooth by generations, rafters blackened by feast smoke, carved posts touched by hands that had gone into burial mounds, and the place where quarrels had been settled before they became blood. Children had slept there during storms. Brides had crossed its threshold. Old men had given last counsel there. Hunters had returned there with frost in their beards and meat on poles. Names lived in the wood because hands had spoken them there again and again. It was shelter. It was memory. It was danger. Ulfric saw it all at once, and the seeing struck harder than the cold. If the Longhouse remained, some would turn back for a bowl, a carved stool, a buried token under the hearth, a father's knife hidden in a beam, a wife's comb set away before fever. They would return by twos, then alone. The dead would have a door to gather around, and the living would have a reason to open it. Freya came to stand beside him. Her breath moved white across her mouth. "They are asking how much food goes into the hall," she said. "All that cannot travel," Ulfric said. She looked at him sharply. "That is less than a feast. It is more than we can carry. A bitter host you make, a living one." She turned toward the Longhouse. In her face he saw the fight from the wounded line, not with spears now, but with shame. To abandon the village had been one wound. To burn the heart of it was another. "You mean to fire it?" she said. Ulfric did not answer quickly. Men who answered quickly to such things were either fools or liars. "If we leave it standing," he said at last, "it will call us back. Homes are meant to call us back. Not now. Not with those things on the ice. Not with gold that climbs out of the sea. Not with children who will follow any adult who says he forgot his mother's brooch." Freya's jaw tightened. "The hall holds our dead. Then we must not let the dead use it against the living." A gust crossed the shore, low and bitter. Far out, something scraped over ice. A line of villagers froze. One child whimpered into a cloak. The watchers near the returned coin lifted spears they could barely keep steady. Astrid emerged from the shadow of a storage shed with a small bowl wrapped in cloth. Salt, Ulfric guessed, though there should have been almost none left to spare. Her hair was stiff with frost. Her eyes had the sleepless clarity of someone who had already given up every comforting answer. "The house knows we are leaving," she said. Freya gave a hard laugh without humor. "Now houses know?" "Everything that has held breath learns the shape of it," Astrid said. "Stone, wood, cloth, bone. That does not make it a god. That does not make it safe." Ulfric looked at the Longhouse doors. "We will gather there," he said, "not to hide, not to pretend we are staying, to say farewell in a way that cannot be mistaken for waiting." Freya watched him with anger and understanding fighting behind her eyes. "And after, it burns." The word went out from him through the nearest people, not as a shout, but as a wound passed hand to hand. Some began to protest. Some covered their mouths. One old woman nodded before anyone else did, as if she had been expecting the price and hated that Ulfric had been brave enough to name it. Leif stood near the boat line with a bundle of oars across his arms. He heard the word burn and looked toward the Longhouse as if someone had struck a living thing. "Not all of it can die," he said. Ulfric met his eyes. "Then find what can travel." Leif looked down at the oars. The wood was pale where ice had scraped it, dark where hands had gripped it for seasons. He nodded once, not because he accepted the order, but because he understood there was no gentler one waiting behind it. Freya turned to the people. "Bring what food cannot be carried. Bring empty bowls. Bring names if you still have voice for them. Children first, wounded near the inner wall, spears at the door. No one goes to the shore alone. No one touches the coin." This time no one argued. The Longhouse doors opened. The dark inside seemed warmer than the world, though no fire had yet been lit. People began to enter, not for comfort, not for shelter, not for one more night pretending the roof could save them, but for farewell. The last feast began with hunger. There was no laughter, no boast, no song that rose free of the throat. The benches filled slowly, as if each person had to ask the wood for permission before sitting. The old places remained even when the bodies that belonged to them were gone. Here, a man had always leaned back too far after drinking. There, a woman had slapped dough from her hands while scolding boys for tracking snow inside. Near the central posts, children had once crawled under benches pretending to be wolves. Now children sat upright, wrapped in cloaks, watching adults measure every crumb. Freya set guards near the doors, not because the enemy had crossed the threshold, but because grief could make a person run toward foolishness faster than fear could. She placed the wounded against the inner wall, close enough to heat if heat came, far enough from the door that sudden panic would not crush them. She gave children pieces of dried fish no larger than 2 fingers and told them to chew slowly. A boy tried to save half for later. "Eat it now," she said, more gently than her face allowed. "Later has its own teeth." The remaining food came in baskets, cloths, bowls, and bare hands. Frozen barley scraped from a bin, strips of fish too hard to bend, a heel of bread gone grey at the edges, a few onions with green hearts. Bone broth thickened with what no one would name, pieces of smoked meat that should have been saved for travel but had spoiled where brine leaked and frost split the jar. Nothing was enough for a feast, and yet all of it became one because it was the last food the Longhouse would witness. Ulfric stood at the high seat and did not sit. That, more than any speech, told the people what this meal was. A feast had a host. This had a judge, or a mourner, or a man who had chosen to make himself both because no one else could bear it. "We eat what cannot go," he said. "We carry what must. We leave what would turn our feet backward." A man near the lower bench muttered, "We leave ourselves then." Ulfric heard him. Everyone did. "Some of ourselves," Ulfric said, "not all." The answer did not comfort. It was not meant to. It gave the grief a shape large enough to stand in. Astrid moved to the cold hearth. The ash there had been raked from the last proper fire, mixed with soot from years of smoke and a little char left from beams older than most of the people in the room. She knelt and placed a blackened bowl beside it. "A house that fed us should not be left empty for hunger to wear," she said. "A house that heard names should not be left open for wrong mouths. Speak what must be carried. Leave what must become ash. Do not ask ash to be a boat. Do not ask boats to be graves." No one asked if this would save them. After the salt line, after the dim stones, after the gold returning from black water, they knew better than to ask such a small thing of a large darkness. An elder woman rose first. Her name was Sigrun, and she had outlived 2 husbands, 3 brothers, and the daughter whose spindle she carried in her sleeve. She brought the spindle forward, held it above the hearth, and kissed the wood. "Ingrid spun wool by this fire," she said. "She cursed knots. She sang off key. She hid honey from her sons. Let the smoke remember what my hands cannot carry." She set the spindle beside the ash. A hunter brought a broken antler tine. A girl brought a strip of blue cloth from a cradle. A man brought the handle of a knife whose blade had snapped in the work of cutting frozen rope. One by one they placed small things near the hearth, not treasure, not wealth, nothing that would tempt the sea or the dead, but fragments of use and love. Each object made the room smaller. Each name made the roof heavier. Leif watched with his writing hand closed around nothing. He had no parchment enough for all of it. He had no ink that would not freeze. Even if he had, he knew the lie of full recording. A life did not fit into a mark. A mother did not fit into a line. A house did not fit into a tale merely because someone wanted it to. A child asked, "Will the smoke take them to the dead?" The question cut through the hall. Several faces turned to Astrid, hungry for one clean promise. Astrid looked at the child and did not soften the truth into poison. "Smoke carries what smoke can carry," she said. "Names carry what mouths can carry. Hands carry what work can carry. We do not command the dead tonight. We refuse to feed what calls wrongly." The child frowned, trying to hold the answer. Freya crouched beside her. "It means we remember while walking," Freya said. "Not while freezing here." That answer the child understood. The meal moved slowly. People ate as if chewing could delay the torch. Bowls passed from hand to hand, never full, never quite empty, until they were scraped clean. No one took more than another. Shame had made thieves of some in the matter of gold, but hunger in the Longhouse made judges of all. A man who reached twice for broth saw a girl watching him and lowered his hand. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls. At times, the hall creaked in answer. The sound made people glance upward as though the roof might speak. From far off, beyond the shore, came another scrape over ice, then silence. Ulfric listened to every sound and counted what each meant. How long to finish the rite? How long to anoint the door? How long to prepare the boats? How long before dawn turned the ice grey enough for the dead to be seen plainly? He hated himself for measuring farewell by danger, but he measured it anyway. Freya saw his face and came near. "Give them breath," she said quietly. "Breath is what I am trying to keep. Then do not spend all of it counting." He looked at her. In another season he might have answered sharply. In this one he only nodded. When the last bowl was empty, Astrid took ash from the hearth and mixed it with a little melted snow. She marked the floor before the central posts, not in letters, not in runes that begged to be read, but in a dark line that made a boundary between staying and leaving. Elders who still had voices began a low chant. It named no secret. It asked no victory. It held a rhythm older than clear speech, a sound made for work, burial, rowing, and endurance. People bowed their heads. Some wept without sound. Some stared as if tears had frozen behind their eyes. The farewell feast had become something else, exactly what Astrid had feared and needed it to become. Not celebration, not remedy, not surrender, a rite of ash. When it ended, the bowls sat empty on the tables. The ash bowl waited by the hearth. The silence in the Longhouse was heavier than hunger, and no one mistook it for peace. Astrid carried the salt as if it were a child too weak to cry. The bowl was small, wrapped in wool, held close against her ribs. What lay inside should have been kept for meat, wounds, water, and travel. Salt had become more than salt since the dead began to answer debt. It had become line, warning, breath, and argument. It had failed to save them completely. It had still mattered. That was the cruelest kind of truth, the kind that gave no victory and allowed no abandonment. The people followed her from the hearth to the Longhouse doors. They did not crowd. Freya made sure of that. She placed children behind mothers, wounded behind benches, bearers near the threshold, and old ones where they could see without being crushed. No one laughed at the ordering. Discipline had become another form of mourning. Ulfric stood inside the doors with his hand on one post. The wood was warm from all the hands that had touched it over years. He thought of those hands now and wondered how many would be angry with him. He did not try to answer. A leader could survive hatred. A child could not survive a dead village. Astrid stopped before the threshold. Outside, the sky had begun to thin, not with day yet, but with the threat of it. The snow held a faint grayness. The wounded salt line beyond the open lane looked tired, almost used up. Beyond it, the ice lay dark and uneven. At its edge, black shapes gathered and separated with the slow patience of things that had forgotten warmth but not want. A murmur passed through the hall. Freya lifted her spear. "Eyes here," she said. "Let the dead watch us." "We do not need to watch them back." The words steadied more people than comfort would have. Astrid dipped 2 fingers into the bowl. "This is not enough," she said. Several people flinched. Ulfric knew why. They had wanted her to begin with strength. Instead, she began with the wound. "Salt is not a wall when hands are false," Astrid continued. "Salt is not a remedy when debt has teeth. Salt will not make the stones shine. Salt will not drag gold back into obedience. Salt will not promise that the dead forget us." She touched the left side of the doorframe. The grains clung pale to the old wood. For a breath, they shone like frost under moonlight. But salt can witness a boundary. It can tell a hungry thing that this door is not food. It can tell a grieving heart that not every return is holy. It can tell those who leave that leaving is not the same as betrayal. She touched the right side. The elders behind her began the chant again. This time it was lower, steadier, shaped by tired throats. No one sang. No melody led them away from the room. The sound was rough, almost plain, and because it was plain, it felt older than song. It had the rhythm of rowing through black water, of grinding grain in winter, of carrying a body when the ground was too hard to open. Leif stood near the back, listening with his knife tucked into his belt and an uncarved oar against his shoulder. He tried to remember each phrase and failed. The failure frightened him at first. Then he understood that the chant was not made to be caught whole. It was made to move through bodies while the bodies still had work to do. Astrid drew a line of salt across the lintel. A man whispered, "Then they cannot enter?" Astrid turned her head. Her eyes found him without mercy and without cruelty. "Do not build hope larger than the bowl," she said. The man lowered his gaze. "What then?" another asked. "If not safety?" "Witness," Astrid said. "Refusal. A mark that we did not leave the door open for wrong walking. A mark that says this house was not abandoned to hunger, greed, or the dead." Ulfric felt the words settle where triumph might have lived in another tale. Witness. Refusal. Not safety. Not victory. He could lead people under that truth. He no longer trusted any easier one. Freya came forward with a small pouch. She opened it and revealed the returned coin wrapped in dirty cloth. A hiss moved through the people. Ulfric's hand tightened on the post. "I said no one touches it." "No bare hand did," Freya said. "And no child will find it in snow after we go." The coin did not glow. It did not smoke. It only waited, and waiting was worse. Astrid looked at it for a long moment. "It should not cross the door," she said. "Then where?" Freya asked. Ulfric understood before Astrid answered. "Outside the boundary." Seen, but not welcomed. They placed it on a flat stone beyond the threshold, far enough from the salt not to touch, close enough that no one could pretend it had been forgotten. Astrid sprinkled ash around the stone, not over the coin, never hiding it. Hiding had fed too much already. "Let it accuse the empty shore," she said. "Let no one carry its answer." The elders resumed the chant. The sound pressed against the open doorway and passed into the cold. For a moment, the figures on the ice seemed to stop moving. Perhaps the sound reached them. Perhaps the wind shifted. No one asked. No one named it a sign. Astrid used the last of the salt in a thin line down the center seam of the doors. When the doors closed later, salt would sit between them like a pale scar. A girl near Freya whispered, "Will the house be angry?" Freya looked to Astrid, then chose to answer herself. "A good house keeps people alive," Freya said. "If it cannot do that standing, it will do it burning." The girl nodded with the solemn obedience children give to answers. They will understand years too late. Ulfric stepped outside. The air struck him hard. He faced the village, the shore, the ice, the dying stars. The longhouse behind him had salt on its door and ash in its heart. It looked less like a home now, and more like a body prepared for fire. He wanted to ask forgiveness. Instead, he gave orders. Bring dry scrap. Bring the broken pitch. Not from the boats, unless Freya permits it. Stack it where Astrid marks. Keep water for hands and burns, not for saving the hall. No one enters after the doors close unless I command it. No one cheered. Good. No one should cheer at such orders. Astrid finished the mark at the threshold and stepped back. Salt shone on the doorframe like frost that had chosen to stay awake. Leaf chose the oars because oars still had work ahead of them. A bench could remember, but it could not cross water. A carved post could hold a face, but it would burn where it stood. A chest could keep cloth, combs, and grief, but it would slow a child and drown a tired man. Oars were different. Oars did not merely carry things. They turned fear into distance, one stroke at a time. He set them in a line beside the longhouse, their blades resting in snow, their handles raised on a fallen rail. Some were clean and pale. Some were cracked. Some had been patched with rawhide that would stiffen in the cold. None were worthy of the task he gave them, and that made them honest. His knife was small, better for trimming pegs than carving history. He warmed the blade in his hand and knelt beside the first oar. Freya came past with 2 children and a bundle of blankets. She stopped when she saw him. "If you weaken those, I will break your fingers before the sea does," she said. Leaf looked up. "I will not cut deep. Memory loves to cut deep. So does forgetting." She studied him. The children looked at the oars with round eyes. "What will you carve?" one asked. Leaf almost said names. Then he remembered Astrid's warning against making marks that begged to be more than they were. He remembered how a line could become a chain. He remembered how a story could become a lie if it claimed to hold too much. "Not every name," he said, "not every tale. Only enough for hands to know they are not rowing empty wood." Freya approved that more than she wanted to show. "Keep it shallow. Keep it quick. Dawn does not wait because a boy has feelings." "I am not a boy." "Then carve like a man who knows people need those oars." She moved on. Leaf bent over the wood. He cut the first mark, a roofline, simple and low, not a letter, not a claim to bind the world, only a shape that a thumb could find in darkness. Beside it, he cut a small flame, then a wave, then a line for a path. He did not carve the coin. He would not give that glint a place on the tools that carried them away. An old man named Orm lowered himself onto a crate nearby. "That oar belonged to Kari," Orm said. "She broke a tooth laughing when it slipped and struck her jaw." Leaf paused. "Should I mark that?" "How would you mark a broken tooth?" Leaf smiled despite the cold. "Badly." Then Mark laughter. "I do not know how." Orm tapped the side of his own mouth. "No one does. That is why it must be told while there are mouths." Leaf understood. The oars could not replace voices. They could only ask voices to begin. He carved a small open curve near the handle. Not a mouth, not exactly, but enough that a hand might ask what it meant. Orm nodded and looked away before tears could be seen. More people came, drawn by the work. Not a crowd, never enough to stop the evacuation, but one at a time. A woman told him which oar had been used when her son learned to row in circles and cursed the fjord for moving under him. A hunter pointed out the blade that had once struck seal ice all day and brought back nothing but blisters. A girl touched a dark handle and said her mother had held it during a storm and sung until the waves seemed ashamed of themselves. Leaf did not record every story. He could not. He carved marks that opened doors instead of closing them. A notch for storm, a shallow circle for the hearth. A line of small cuts for steps in snow, a hooked curve for fish, a slant for wind, a hollow for an empty seat. Nothing that tried to explain the curse, nothing that claimed to command the dead, nothing that named what was forbidden to know. Astrid came to watch after finishing the door. "Do they trouble you?" Leif asked, meaning the marks. "Only if you ask them to do more than wood can do. I ask them to remember. Wood remembers pressure, hands remember meaning. Keep both humble." He nodded and carved another shallow line. "The hall is too large to carry," he said. "Yes. The stories are too many." "Yes, Leif. Then this is failure." Astrid knelt beside him. Her knees cracked softly. Most true rights are failures that refuse to become lies. He looked at her. "You should not say that to comfort people." "I did not say it to comfort you." That helped more than comfort would have. Ulfric approached while Leif was binding the last carved oar with a strip of cloth so the mark near the grip would not splinter. The leader's face had gone hard in the way stone goes hard after wet cold, not untouched, frozen around pressure. "Will they hold?" Ulfric asked. Leif flexed the oar. "They will row." "That is what I asked." "No. You asked whether memory had made them weak." For a moment, Freya, passing nearby, looked ready to rebuke him. Ulfric raised a hand and stopped her. "Has it?" Ulfric asked. Leif ran his thumb across the shallow roofline on the nearest handle. "Not if people grip them where they should." Ulfric took the oar and closed his hand around the mark. His knuckles whitened. He stared at the Longhouse, then at the boats, then at the people moving between them like embers trying not to go out. "Good," he said. "Then let the stories work." Leif almost asked what work stories could do against ice filled with dead men, gold that returned, salt that failed, and a hall that would soon be smoke. He did not ask because he knew the answer would not be enough. Stories could not hold a shield line. Stories could not feed children. Stories could not make the warden stones wake. But when the shore vanished behind them, stories might keep a people from becoming only refugees with good reasons to despair. He set the last oar in the snow. The line of them looked like pale ribs, or like a narrow bridge broken into pieces. Each bore shallow marks made for hands, not eyes. Roof, wave, flame, path, fish, storm, empty seat, laughter, hearth, leaving. Freya returned and counted them by touch, not aloud. "Enough?" "No," Leif said. She nodded. "Then enough for now." Together they carried the oars toward the boats. Behind them, the Longhouse door waited with salt on its frame and ash at its heart. Before them, water and ice waited for hands to make distance. The oars lay in snow, carved with names that were not fully written, and tales that must cross water by being told. The fire began small because every large thing that destroys a life begins by asking for one hand to obey. Ulfric held the torch and wished, for one cowardly breath, that someone would strike him down before he used it. No one did. Freya stood near the children with her spear lowered across their path so none could run forward. Astrid stood by the salt-marked door with ash on her fingers. Leif stood beside the boats, one hand on a carved oar, watching as if he were trying to learn how a home died so he would never tell it falsely. The Longhouse doors had been closed. No one remained inside. Freya had checked, then checked again. Then sent 2 women through the shadows with her because grief hid people better than darkness did. They found an old man sitting by the lower bench with his hand on a post, unable to rise because he had decided without saying so that he would rather burn with the hall than leave it. Freya did not shame him. She knelt, put his hand against her cheek, and said his granddaughter was already on the sled asking for him. That was not true until Freya made it true by carrying him there and placing the girl beside him. Now the hall was empty of breath. It still seemed to wait. Ulfric touched the torch to the first bundle of scrap packed under the eaves. Dry shavings caught with a soft crackle. Pitch, blackened cloth smoked, resisted, then accepted flame. The fire crept along the prepared wood, yellow at the edge, blue where old fat and resin woke. For a moment it looked too small to matter. Then the Longhouse inhaled. Flame ran upward into the thatch. Smoke rolled under the roof and found old paths through soot. The carved posts at the door glowed with moving light. Salt on the frame shone fiercely, then began to darken grain by grain. A sound came from the people. Not a cry, not a chant, something made by many throats trying not to break. Ulfric stepped back. The fire spread. It took the lower wall first, licking through cracks, finding stored dryness where years of winter had hidden it. It touched the bench where councils had argued over fishing rights. It touched the beam where a boy had once carved a secret mark and been whipped for damaging good wood. It touched the smoke, dark rafters that had held warmth above sleeping bodies. Each part burned as wood burns, and yet every person watching saw more than wood. Freya kept the children turned toward the boats when she could. Some looked anyway. She let them. A child who was leaving forever could not be protected from all seeing. "Remember it standing," she told them. Not only this. Remember the roof with snow on it. Remember the fires. Remember your mothers calling you in. Remember work. Remember noise. Do not let the burning be the only picture. Her voice nearly failed on the last word. She made it hold. Astrid began no new chant. The elders did not either. The rite had been spoken. To keep speaking now would pretend control over flame. They watched in silence while sparks rose and were seized by wind. The winter wind carried embers inland. That was wrong. Everyone felt it. Smoke should have leaned toward the fjord, toward water, toward the place that had returned the coin. Instead, the wind turned and drove small red flecks over roofs, over empty racks, over the trampled lane, toward the fields and the burial ridges beyond. Freya shouted, and people moved fast with blankets and snow to stamp out what fell where it should not. No panic took them. Discipline held because panic had been spent earlier and there was nothing left for it to feed on. Beyond the wounded salt line, the dark figures on the ice stood still. Leif saw them through smoke. Not clearly. Never clearly enough to tell himself he understood them. They were shapes where no warm body should wait, gathered beyond the line of white and grey. Firelight touched ice between them and the village. For a breath he thought he saw heads turned toward the burning hall. Then smoke covered them. Ulfric saw the smoke cover them too and gave no order. This was not a battle. No spear thrust would fix what had brought them here. No brave charge would feed the children. No dead man on ice deserved the last strength of the living unless he crossed. The Longhouse burned because returning had to be made impossible. That was the war in this hour. The roof fell inward with a roar. Several people cried out. One woman dropped to her knees. A man turned away and struck his own chest as if punishing the part of him that wanted to run into the fire. Freya reached him before he moved. She did not embrace him. She put both hands on his shoulders and held him as if holding a gate shut. "No," she said. "My sons sat there." "Then do not make them watch you die in their seat." He shook under her hands. He did not run. Ulfric heard and kept his eyes on the flames. If he looked at every wound he had made, he would stop giving orders. If he stopped giving orders, the living would pay for his need to be forgiven. "Boats forward," he said. "Sledges to the first water. wounded before bundles, children between adults, oars ready. No one carries loose gold. No one leaves the line. The words moved through the people. Work answered grief because work was the only mercy left. Leaf helped place the carved oars into boats that had no right to be called ready. He set each one carefully, blade inward, marks near the hands that would need them. Orm touched the curve that meant laughter and gave a broken smile. A girl touched the hearthmark and whispered something Leaf did not hear. That was good. Not every word needed a witness. Astrid came to Ulfric with the empty salt bowl. "It is done?" he asked. She looked at the burning hall. No. He almost hated her for the answer. Will it be enough? Enough to say we did not leave it whole for hunger. Enough to keep some feet from turning. Enough to make the road behind us honest. Not enough to end what follows. You never give me the answer I want. You are still alive because you stopped asking for that kind. He let the truth hurt and turned back to the people. Dawn came thin and colorless. It did not arrive like rescue. It exposed what night had hidden. The Longhouse was no longer a house. It was a red mouth collapsing around black ribs. Smoke dragged low across the snow and then lifted in torn sheets over the ice. The warden stones beyond the lane remained dim. Frost held their carved lines without light. The wounded salt line lay trampled and pale. The returned coin on its ash, ringed stone had vanished under a dusting of soot, or perhaps it had only stopped glinting because the world had grown too grey for shine. No one went to check. The boats moved. Not smoothly. Nothing about leaving was smooth. Men shoved against ice with poles. Women pushed sledges over frozen ruts. Children stumbled and were lifted. The old cursed under their breath because walking hurt and being carried hurt pride. Freya walked the line again and again, counting without speaking numbers aloud, touching shoulders, correcting loads, cutting away anything that slowed a family too much. A woman tried to carry a hearthstone. Ulfric saw it and stopped her. No. My mother warmed bread on it. Then let your hands remember bread. The stone stays. She looked as if she might strike him. He wished she would. Instead, she placed the stone in the snow and walked on with empty hands held like wounds. At the first water, people began to board. The fjord was not open. Ice broke around the hulls in jagged plates. Every push risked a crack. Every crack risked a foot. Every foot risked a life. The carved oars dipped. For a moment, no one rowed. They looked back. The homeland had become smoke on ice. Where the Longhouse had stood, fire lowered itself into ruin. The last upright beam burned from within, red along one side, black along the other. It leaned slowly, as if listening for a final word. None came. The people had spent words in the hall. They had spent salt on the door. They had spent memory into oars. They had spent the house itself so the living would not be dragged back by what they loved. The beam fell. It struck the floor of coals and sent a final cloud of sparks upward. The wind took them inland. Then even that sound faded. For a breath, the whole shore held still. No war, Horn answered. No elder chanted. No child cried. No dead thing called from the ice. The silence after fire spread over the village like a new snow, covering nothing, forgiving nothing. Ulfric stepped into the lead boat. Freya pushed from the shore. Astrid sat with the empty salt bowl wrapped in her shawl. Leaf took an oar marked with roof, wave, flame, and path. His hand closed over the shallow cuts. Row, Ulfric said. The oars entered black water. Behind them, the Longhouse became smoke, ash, and heat without shelter. Ahead, the fjord opened only by breaking. the people did not sail into safety. They left because the place that made them who they were had been made impossible to return to. The last thing Leif heard from the homeland was nothing. That nothing followed them across the ice. Thank you for listening. This chapter ends here, but the story continues. Follow the series for new chapters, and when you are ready, explore the other worlds and storylines waiting beyond this one. If you enjoyed this episode, leaving a like or a comment helps more listeners find the story.